I'm Nicole Comer. My husband is Tim Comer, and we have a 7-year-old named Isaac Comer. I have been attending here since I was pregnant with Isaac, and he is going to be 8 in October, so probably about 8 years. We got married in September, and I found out I was pregnant with Isaac in January. And it was great. We didn't have any trouble. He was perfect. He came out healthy. And I remember calling up my mom when he was a newborn and saying, "Mom, I don't know how you did this with 6. You're a superhero," because just 1 is a lot of work. I knew I always wanted children, and I enjoyed being part of a big family. So maybe not 6 children, but I could never see myself, I never pictured myself with just 1 child, just because I was used to the kind of the chaos of a home that was filled with so many children. Isaac was 3, I think. It was shortly after his 3rd birthday, and my husband and I agreed that we were ready to try for another one, and we were both, excited. We were just, it happened pretty quickly with Isaac, so we didn't have any reason to think that we would have trouble. We started trying, and it just wasn't happening. As the months went on, though, it did start to drag and get more and more frustrating. So it wasn't until about a year in that I decided to go to the doctor, and they did, a ton of blood work, lots of, they did imaging studies, and they could not find anything wrong. I think that was almost harder than having something wrong, was just not knowing and not having a reason, and so there's nothing to change or fix. I think after the first year, I was still hopeful, still, we're gonna find out what's wrong. And I did end up getting pregnant within that first year, but unfortunately ended in a loss. I really was struggling with my faith. I was struggling with, almost resentment. I work in NICU, so I got to see lots of babies every day. And I got to see lots of my coworkers and friends all get pregnant, and it was really hard. It was hard to feel guilty about being upset. You're never mad that someone else is pregnant, but you're sad for yourself. And that was a conflicting emotion. I never wanted to be sad at the news that somebody else was pregnant, but I found myself there, and you deal with the guilt for that too. And I remember coming home to Tim one day and just crying and being like, I help everybody with their babies all day long, and teach them how to take care of them, and help them, and it drags on me, like it's dragging on me. So the loss was very difficult for me. My son had known too, and he was only 3, but he had known that there was another sibling on the way, and he was very excited. He prayed every day. He'd write down in his preschool prayer board for a brother. I want a brother every day, and I look at it and feel so guilty. I think sometimes God would show me, what I needed to see through him, because I remember thinking to myself one night, I just don't want to pray anymore. I don't want to pray for it anymore. And I never said it out loud, but I went to Isaac. I said, "Okay, what are you praying for tonight?" And that night, instead of praying for a brother, he told me, "Mommy, I don't want to pray anymore. It's not happening." He said, "God doesn't hear me." So I think that was God's way of telling me, I need to be an example for my son. And I said the words out loud that I needed to hear, and I said, God always hears us. There's a reason for everything. We don't understand right now why you don't have a brother yet. I said, but I believe that God He's gonna do what's best for us. A little over 2 years ago, we came up to the front to, pray, and Pastor Nabil came up to us. We explained to him what was going on, and that we had been trying for a while. And he said, God's giving me a word that you're gonna have another baby. I just don't know when. I don't know how long it's gonna take. He goes, but it's going to happen. And I just remember going home and thinking, is that real? Is it true? You start to doubt. Really, the devil really uses doubt in these hard times, and you really have to fight to keep your faith sometimes. So I did have that doubt, is it true? But I wanted to hold on to it, and I said, I'm going to choose to believe that this is true. And then I think another year and a half went by, and he had spoken in church again, and we were talking about unanswered prayers or seemingly unanswered prayers. And he discussed how there was a couple that was here and their prayer has not been answered yet, but I still know what I heard, and I knew, that it was us. And I'm crying, and I'm like, okay, I needed to hear that today. So there was a time that I was in a very bad place. I wasn't even sure if I still believed that God was there, which was, a struggle too. And I remember saying that to my husband. He's like, you can't think like that, And I was like, I know, I don't, I'm just feeling so low. And I realized I had allowed Satan to take this situation. Instead of using it, for good, I was allowing it to cause resentment and anger and doubt and fear. I feel like there was a turning point, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to let Satan beat me down with this. I'm not going to let him steal the joy I have with my son already and my family and our health. So I really tried to change my perspective. Every day I started waking up and thanking God for all the things that I had, and I'd list through. I'm thankful for my husband. I'm thankful for my healthy son. I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my job. And I really started to see my attitude shift. And then I started to see all the little relationships and all the little miracles during this whole time. And I just really apologized. I'm like, God, I'm sorry that I allowed this to really steal joy from me, to make me doubt you. I just felt like, I couldn't let go of it. I remember praying to God, if this isn't what you want in my life, please take this desire away. And it was still there. I still was like, I really, really want more children. They were preaching about audacious prayers, and I think that was the day that I was, I was feeling low when I went in that day. I was feeling a little low. Everything in that service was exactly what I needed to hear. So I wrote down on the paper, please let us have a baby this year. And I was not feeling very hopeful about it there. But afterwards, I told my husband, I was like, I really needed that service to feel a lot better. And he wrote down his, and it was the next day that I took a positive pregnancy test. It was 4 years and 3 months that we tried. At first, I wasn't sure if I should believe it. And we went for our first ultrasound, and we saw our perfect little baby, and they looked great. And we went back for another one, and they saw our perfect little baby again. And everything looked great. And when they were almost done, I said, what was that to the side? And they said, yeah, what was that to the side? And then they found another little baby with a little heartbeat, and they both looked great. Even Isaac, he didn't know, other than we had given him a shirt that said Big Brother, and he found out, and this is before we found out about the twins, and he came up to me and he whispered, there's more than one in there. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, there's more than one. I was like, no, there's just one. And so when there was two, he's like, I knew it. Honestly, he started to say right before the pause, he's like, Mommy, I'm okay being an only child. It's okay. I prayed for a long time, and I don't think I'm gonna get a brother. He wasn't even upset. He just said, Mommy, I don't think Jesus wants us to have more, and I'm okay. I'm okay being just me, because he used to really be sad. So I couldn't wait to tell him then because I knew when he said that. I just was waiting a little bit, and we gave him the shirt, and he fell over and sits back up, and he's like, when did this happen? Like, he was so excited. God had given me exactly what I had dreamed about. I think of that verse, and this helped me through just during the infertility, where it talks about taking every thought captive and giving it back to God. And I just really kept saying that to myself every time something negative would creep in. And even now I'm like, take it captive. There's so many times I'm like, God, I lay this at your feet, but I kept picking it back up, and I kept trying to do everything myself. Then I'd say, I'm going to leave it back to you, and then I would start to feel better, but I'd pick it back up again. And it was when I finally left it there for a little while that I really saw his work. To think God really does use those hard times, and when you look back and just see he was always there, even when it felt like he wasn't there. He was constantly there, comforting me, speaking to me, guiding me. And when it felt like he wasn't there, it was when I was the one, I feel like, turning away. I was the one who, wasn't open to listening. I just want to, tell people to never give up that hope, and even if the prayer seems unanswered, God is doing what's best for you. He isn't doing anything to punish you. You have to look beyond your pain sometimes and just, look for that joy like I had to decide to do. And it really just transformed my relationship with God. And it was really all about faith, just learning to trust God. I think it's just the timing, seeing it now, it's perfect, really, it is perfect.